Hello and welcome to today's Informa Automotive Group webinar, Software-Defined Vehicles, the Role of Data Modernization in the Journey through EV Transformation. My name is Maite Bezerra. I am a Principal Analyst in Software-Defined Vehicles for the Informa Automotive Group, and I will be your moderator today. Joining me, we have Mahendra Muli, who is a Strategy and Business Development Leader for Vehicle Technology at AWS, Dennis Guilbault, Industry Director, Automotive and Solution Architect for PCG Services, Ken Royce, Global Director of Automotive and Sustainability Go-to-Market for Inform, and Peter Maithel, Principal Global Strategist for the Automotive sector, also at Infor. All right, so let's start our presentation. So the title of our webinar is Software-Defined Vehicles. But before we focus on software-defined vehicles, I think it's important to take a step back and understand why is the automotive industry going through this paradigm shift. So if we look at the automotive industry, things have remained relatively stable for the past century, really not requiring much innovation, significant changes by these players. But now we are living in a moment with changes and threats coming from all fronts. So first, you have electrification, which is driving the traditionally high barriers to entry, and incumbent OEMs are facing unprecedented level of competition. Second, you have high interest rates, which are driving demand for new vehicles down. And because of that, we are now seeing price wars among OEMs, and of course, margins are going down. We also have newer generations rethinking vehicle ownership. Some of them are not even considering taking a driving license. And there is a higher appreciation for alternative modes of transportation. And also we have, well, with the supply chain crisis, the OEMs really realized that they have a higher dependence upon a small number of suppliers, which signaled to their suppliers that they have a higher bargaining power. And last but not least, rivalry is getting intense because vehicles are becoming more complex and therefore more costly to produce. But at the same time, incumbent OEMs are facing competition from disruptive players, BEV players that have cost-efficient processes and more cost-efficient products as well. So if you look at the macro environment, the situation is a bit complex, and it becomes even worse because of this continuing and expanding geopolitical crisis that makes all these external forces volatile and unpredictable. So from a macro environment perspective, it's quite clear that the automotive industry needs a paradigm shift. But if we look at the micro perspective, we also face a need to change. So now we have customers expecting a digital lifestyle. So they expect their vehicles to be an extension of their smart homes and their smartphones. Also, we are living in a data-driven moment in which AI is becoming more important. So more features and features that require sophisticated algorithms have to be added to the vehicles. And of course, with electrification, and more focus on software, we are seeing value shifting in the car as well. And the result is that the current vehicle electric and electronic architecture and the monolithic software development, they are not fitting to address all these changes in the environment. So again, from a micro perspective, so from the vehicle perspective, the OEMs also need to change. And all of this leads us to SDV. The SDV concept really helps OEMs to address all of these challenges that I spoke to, even macro and micro. But I think one thing that is important to talk about SDVs is that it's not just about the vehicle. So it's not just the vehicle architecture, the hardware architecture and software architecture that we will have to change. We will also see drastic changes in the rest of the industry as well. So for example, the incumbent OEMs, they grew their organizations based on the vehicle architectures. It was like a mirror, right? So the vehicle would have several ECUs, separated ECUs, and the OEM would have separated departments that would be focused on the development of these ECUs. But now that we're talking about centralization and consolidation in the vehicle architecture, we need to see the centralization and consolidation happening in the organizations as well. So we need to break the silos that we have in OEMs. We need centralized data and communication. But also there will be a change in the value chain. So OEMs used to deliver value to the vehicle until we reached the dealer. Now, there is an expectation for customer life cycle journey. So the OEM needs to deliver value to the customer during the life cycle of the car. But not only that, with electrification, there's also an increasing conversation of OEMs being responsible for the recycling of the vehicle as well. So this is what we call shift left. Sorry, stretch right. But at the same time, the OEMs, they need to improve the development cycles. They need to be able to deliver value to the customer more quickly. 3, 5, 7 years of development cycles, they won't do anymore. OEMs need to become more efficient. So they need to now shift left, make their software development more efficient and quicker. But also we will see changes in the supply chain as well. So we are going to transition from the traditional hierarchical structure to this ecosystem of players that talk to the OEM directly, but also talk among each other. And this will be fundamental to make sure the vehicles are updatable, upgradable during the life cycle, but also meet cybersecurity requirements as well. Well, with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mahendra Muli. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I was just saying thank you, Maite, for that great introduction to the topic. Hidden in your presentation was also the definition for software-defined vehicles, which we understand as two main aspects. One is that the vehicle has to be updatable throughout the life cycle of its life cycle. And secondly, that from the data that we would have access to about the vehicle performance and the consumer experience, we should be able to improve the product, not only the future product, but also the existing product, and thereby the consumer experience with that product. And with that in mind, when we, at Amazon, we have a famous working backwards working methodology. We always start with the customer, see what their aspirations are, and then we work backwards. We look at the industry and say, okay, what is the industry talking about with regards to SDV? And I picked up 4 or 5 statements that I've noticed. And one of them goes with to update the vehicle with latest features and technology long after the vehicle has left the factory, which talks to the improvements of the vehicle throughout its life cycle. Then the next one talks about delivering these new features and apps to the consumers in a fraction of time. Now, this talks to the speed of innovation that they are aspiring to provide. The third is maximize the software reuse so that we can create more value-added features. And finally, the entire development experience for the engineers so that they can move to this shift left that you talked about so that rapid innovations can be brought to the market at the earliest as possible. Now, behind this is also the financials that come with that and a possibility of incremental value that can be generated. And so OEMs are also looking at that. We had a Stellantis statement about an incremental revenue of almost $20 billion driven by the software-defined and software-enabled vehicles. So with that, as a customer or a industry need, what is really the aspiration behind this? It is to, as Maite pointed out, to deliver that seamless digital experience for the vehicle, especially when we talk about electric vehicles. And if a consumer has to ask a question, what can I do or how should I charge my battery so that I can extend its life cycle? Now that questions become very specific to the charging that particular customer is patterning, how they are charging it day in and day out, how they're using the vehicle, the conditions that vehicle is being used in. So it becomes a very personalized response that the customer expects, not in generic answer. And so that drives a lot of technological change in the industry. And so there we see a change or the trends with regards to the hardware infrastructure that goes and provides electronics, the software in the vehicle. I've been in the industry for about 23 years. And as I have grown through the industry, I've noticed that our electrical architecture kept on expanding, more modules got added, more bus networks got into the vehicle, and resulting in vehicles that have 100 plus ECUs in the car. Now, it is extremely difficult to manage the expectations that we talked about earlier and deliver on those with the same architecture. So the architecture is evolving to something called a domain-based architecture with some high-power computers that are essentially managing the software for particular domains like powertrain or vehicle dynamics and so on. And then finally, this would evolve into what is called a zonal architecture, where there will be even powerful computing systems that have a longer lifespan. We earlier talked about how the software has to be updatable throughout the life cycle. And as we all know, the life cycles of automotive products is much longer than consumer devices. So this adds to the complexity that is resulting in this sort of a modified architectures that leads to consolidation of ECUs. Today's vehicles by itself have almost 100 to 150 million lines of code. And this is by far the most complex product, if you would, in the industry. And then this software volume and complexity is continuing to grow and will grow as we go down this path of software-defined vehicles and deliver on those consumer expectations. And when this complexity is going to grow and we want to shift left, it also means that the traditional ways of how that hardware is sourced, how that software is sourced and delivered in the industry will also undergo a massive change. And so it will require us to have a lot more collaboration among all the value chain players so that we can deliver. So this is a transformation in the industry that not only is transforming the product, it is also transforming how we deliver those user experiences, how we develop that software, and the entire ecosystem around this. So there's a change that is a massive transformation that is happening in the industry with software-defined vehicles. So clearly it brings on the challenges of maintaining the software quality. And with the volume and speed of software that we are going to foresee come to us, we also want to take care that we don't need to fall into the pitfalls of having errors go into the market. We have had recalls. We see this type of news items that come up that talk about recalls. And there was a recent one also that came about from one of the OEMs. And so we want to avoid this type of situations because it goes also to the brand image, it goes also to the costs and a massive amount of costs that OEMs had to bear. So on one side, we have software complexity, software volume, and on the other side, we want to be able to deliver more user experiences. So this brings out another transformation that leads to how we develop the software and how we validate the software for the consumer. And so with this, we see that the goals that the industry has relates to how do we accelerate the software development and time to market, release higher quality of code, reduce updates and recalls, deliver that enhanced user experience throughout the life cycle of the vehicle, and then utilize that vehicle data to make improvements for the current and the next generation of vehicles. And for this at AWS and Amazon, we are taking a three-step approach. One is to enable cloud-native development of software, which will enable having to collaborate much more easier across the ecosystem. Secondly, provide solutions that address the software lifecycle management throughout its life. And finally, around data, provide access to the vehicle performance as well as the consumer experience directly to our lines of businesses so that they can deliver on those user experiences. This is clearly a massive challenge, not to be done by any particular single company or OEM, but an entire ecosystem-wide innovation. And therefore, at AWS, we commonly say that it's a challenge of being faster, future, faster, and together. And that brings the ecosystem play. So with that as the introduction, I'll hand it off to Peter to talk about the ecosystem aspects of SDV.
Thank you, Mahendra. And yes, so as you touched on, and Maite also, a key thing that Maite, I think, said initially is that the whole industry is changing, right? And it's no longer this hierarchical model that we've all been so used to. It's the OEMs and the suppliers. And now it's this, as you see on the screen here, it's the graphic that comes to mind is this sort of many-to-many network, right? It's not a linear thing, it's a network, and the complexity is orders of magnitude greater than what it used to be because and again, Maite, I think you said this, it's not only that, OEMs communicating with suppliers, but everyone is communicating with everybody else and, at different times. So it's a many-to-many relationship sort of a model here, and it's, as I said, extremely complex. And it's really, when we talk about software-defined vehicles, right, it's really, there's the software component, obviously, and then of course there's the vehicle, as the term implies. But really, what's it all about? And Mahendra, you talked about this. It's really all about the end-to-end user experience. And when you talk about shift left and shift right, or stretch right, really that user experience, if you take it all the way to the very beginning of that experience, that user experience actually begins when a customer starts researching a vehicle. Okay, so it begins when they actually go on. Let's say you're looking at a GM versus a Ford versus a Hyundai, or some, you're comparing to different vehicles. When you go on their website and you're starting to research, you're starting to develop impressions about that brand right there based on your experience, even off the website, and you haven't even seen the vehicle yet. You haven't touched it yet, right? So it's really this concept of end-to-end, beginning at the very beginning. So and really what this, I think, implies for the industry is, for all of us and who are involved in some form in this industry, is it's not just about the hardware or even the software. It's really putting those together, and it's this whole service-oriented approach, right? So because to deliver that outstanding user experience, you have to have that really end-to-end service-oriented approach, right? And when you look at this diagram here, for example, and that big red, so you've got all the entities, the different, whether it's the communications providers or the content providers or the suppliers and the government bodies and the repair shops, all of these entities that are on the outside of that circle there that are stakeholders in this ecosystem. And then you've got that red circle in the middle there, which says Data Fabric and Infor OS. So we at Infor, we have and then the company X, so you can put, your favorite OEM there, and that's your company, or your favorite company in there, because but one of the things that is so critical to making this all work is that integration, right? So to be able to integrate the data flows and the interactions, if you will, which is of course all generating data between these entities, and that's where, for example, Infor has solutions in that regard, where we can help integrate that ecosystem, and then of course tie it to the back end, which is what Amazon Web Services delivers, right? Because we run on Amazon Web Services. But it's really the secret sauce to this recipe is that integration, bringing it all together, so that when if you're in a vehicle and you want to purchase a service, right? And you purchase that through your vehicle interface. Well, guess what? That transaction has a financial implication, right? So after it works its way through the system, and it's going to end up in the OEM's database, I would imagine, where there's a record of that financial transaction, because now they're going to deliver some software-enabled feature to the vehicle over the air, right? So they're going to send that, and you're going to now get that addition, because you paid for a subscription to, maybe additional horsepower, or you want some additional feature turned on. And so there's that transaction that's created, that's flowing into the OEM system, that's going to require other service providers to maybe deliver some of that capability. All of this needs to be stitched together, right? And when we talk about data modernization, which is in the title for today's webinar, the data that's flowing as a result of these transactions is not just your typical structured data, which resides in files and databases and in your typical legacy systems. Now it is every kind of data. It's structured data, it's semi-structured data, it's unstructured data, it's voice, it's video, it's social network sentiment, it's all these different kinds of data. So it's so important to have a data strategy that really incorporates all of these kinds of data and brings them together to deliver that unified customer experience. And of course, at Infor, we have our data fabric that helps bring those things together. So really, this is a big change in the way OEMs, and in fact, the entire industry, Mahendra touched on this too, how it's going to impact relationships between OEMs and all these suppliers. I now use the word suppliers in quotes, because now these are ecosystem partners in one form or another, right? So we got to expand our way of thinking of just the OEM supplier relationship. These are all ecosystem partners. Sometimes they're suppliers, sometimes they're a consumer. So their roles may change too, depending on the interaction. So that all needs to be factored in, and it's a massive culture change as well. And I think, Maite, you may have said this. One of you said it. I don't want to insult the other person. One of you did bring it up, that it is a culture change in the industry as well. So it's because the software and the hardware of the vehicle operate at the vehicles have a 10 to 15 year lifespan, right? Mahendra, I think you said this, or again, one of you said it. And but software, obviously, there are releases that come out maybe twice a year. We know this from our phones, right? Multiple updates to the OS every time. those things have to be kept in sync, because you know what, you could be driving a 10-year-old vehicle, but you need to be able to run that software that's going to be released 10 years from now. Your vehicle that you buy today needs to be able to run that software 10 years from now. It needs to be able, that hardware needs to be able to be either already designed with that or upgradable in some form to be able to handle that, right? So there's a lot of change, and because of these different clock speeds of these different aspects of the business, that these all have to be harmonized and made to work in sync. Because if one part starts to fall apart, doesn't sort of link up with the others, again, guess where the impact will be felt? Customer or user experience. And that's the last thing we want, right? So Dennis, is there something you want to talk about when you talk about integration? I know PCG does a lot of that work. Anything you want to opine about in this regard?
Yeah. So as I've heard everybody talk today, as we look at this change in the market, at PCG, we work with the suppliers, as you mentioned, not really suppliers anymore, the ecosystem partners, right? It's changing. And that means we're collecting more and more data. We've talked about that today. But once again, what are we doing with that data? We need to turn it into information using some of these tools that you're showing here, so we can react, once again, providing a user experience that we're no longer waiting for a part. We're collecting data, we're able to be proactive versus reactive in the industry. And as you look at this chart that you have up, like your Infor OS, that's one of the things PCG works on, is looking at the solution to bring this together for the ecosystem. What best works? We need to get to market faster at each of these pieces that we have out there. Right. So how do we tie them together? And that's where the Infor OS comes in, right? It's adapting, it's changing, it's there to grow with each of the ecosystem partners out there. So,
yep. That's exactly right. That's a good point you mentioned about the ability to adapt and grow and change, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Thank you.
So I wanted to talk briefly about the architecture. As Mahendra mentioned, domain architecture, zonal architecture, to deliver and support customers in this transformation. Infor's built out a SaaS-based solution that runs on AWS, and it's a digital platform, right? And it enables stretch right, stretch left. You're always within 30 days of having a current release, and it enables people to go much quicker. And really, security. AWS is top of the class in supporting and keeping everything secure. We have to consider vehicle security as well now as part of this paradigm shift. And we're tracking emissions, we're tracking scrap waste, we're tracking all of these things. But it really comes back to that centralized platform, as Dennis was mentioning, really with all of our tools to tie this in together and make development and improvement go that much quicker. So Dennis, I don't know if you want to talk about tools here.
Yeah, so once again with the Infor infrastructure here, as we look at it, we talked about the data, right, collecting that, but as we look at it, being able to use AI and some of the analytic tools to take that data and turn it into information that we can use to, once again, I said it before, but being proactive. Throughout my career, I've been doing this for about 25 years. A lot of times on the supplier base, we were being reactive, and that doesn't end up being a good user experience in the end, right? We need to be able to have the user experience be what we want, right? I mean, I had examples in the past where you have a car that you wait 3-4 months for a part. You want to be able to get that. So the user experience is, we can start being more predictive in what we need to do in the industry. And using some of these tools here at PCG, what we end up doing is we work with you to find the right solution, align it with some of these tools to make sure that we're addressing the needs to, once again, use this to end up creating a user experience in the end that we want to see.
Thank you so much, Mahendra, Dennis, Peter, Ken, for all these valuable insights. I really like this discussion, really exploring a different part of SDV, a bit different from what we usually see in the focus. So We are now going to move to the second part of our webinar, which consists of a fireside chat with our panelists. But before we start, I would like to remind the audience that we're going to have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please do not forget to submit them in the Q&A box that you can see in the left-hand side of your screen. So with that, let's start our discussion. I think I touched on this point, and I would like to get a more direct answer from the panel. When we talk about software-defined vehicles, the discussion is usually more centered into the vehicle systems and the vehicle functions. We don't hear much about ERP, for example. So I just wanted to get your perspective on how exactly do you see ERP intersecting with the SDV concept?
I don't know if you mind if I answer a little bit, and then I'll Peter and Ken. But as I look at it, it's not just the ERP. As you looked at the ecosystem, it's about the pieces that all come together as your business solution, right? The total cloud, the total suite of applications. ERP is a base of that, but the other tools are very critical. You know, the more we can collect up the shop floor, the more we can do preventative maintenance, the more we'll improve that customer experience. Ken, Peter, do you?
Yeah, so no, thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so indeed it is much more than the ERP. So of course, Infor is a major ERP player, but we have a full suite of solutions, including PLM and warehouse management, supply chain, etc. To further build on what Dennis is saying, the ability to accelerate the product development process, which starts in the PLM system, right? And the ability to then take that all the way through. So for example, how could it affect user experience, right? So let's say that I, as a customer, want a part replaced on my car, but because my warehouse management system is not working right, I can't get that part shipped to the dealership in the right time, and therefore I'm unable to use my vehicle, and so on and so forth. That is a very negative customer experience, right? So it's not just the ERP, it's all these components that need to work together as a full suite. And of course, we talked about the back-end integration aspect of it as well. So, all of it really impacts the user experience. And the ERP is probably the biggest chunk of that sort of operating back-end for a company, let's face it. But it has ties to the entire ecosystem through our Infor OS and the pieces that I just mentioned. So.
I was going to add to what Peter said. He talked about data fabric earlier. So there's a lot of data that gets collected, but also there needs to be an integration of that data. So we have products that do this data mesh and create those insights as well. And we essentially do undifferentiated heavy lifting on our part to be able to enable Infor OS sort of solutions that create that data mesh to enable that data integration. So sorry, Ken, I jumped ahead of you, but yeah, please go ahead.
No, I mean, it's related, right? I was going to say about data collection being the key, because if you're not capturing data now, you don't know how you're performing, you don't know where to invest, you don't know, what you're aiming at, right? So being able to capture the data is really key to moving forward and progressing on your journey.
Yeah, just to add an additional note there, we also have consumers who are like fleet managers, and those customers need the data not only just at a later stage, but also predictive and preventive maintenance stages. And you want to connect that to the value chain of supply chain. And so when that integration happens, there is efficiency to be gained across the entire ecosystem. And so those are the benefits that we can now have when we have the software-defined vehicles, because we would have that insight that can be generated using our AI ML capabilities as part of that.
And to do that, Mahendra, to your point, it's so important to be able to get a handle on all of that data, all the different kinds of data, have that strategy that extracts the most value from that data. And then, of course, the processing occurs on the back end of, on the AWS back end. Did that help, Maite? Did that answer the question?
Definitely, but creates more questions because, I'm hearing you talking. I'm hearing you talking about this several different elements and different kinds of data coming from different sources. So we have the car that's producing terabytes of data, and we also have different suppliers as well. So my question is, the OEMs are coming from these hierarchically structured supply chain, right? And then we are coming to this ecosystem with several different types of data coming from several parts, kind of unstructured. How can the OEMs manage this all? And deliver value and make sure that everything is concise and working well?
Well, if I had a simple single answer for that, I would be the richest man in the world, wouldn't I? So it is definitely, it is a great question, and it is the question, one of the questions. And I think, it's a journey, right? And I think the software-defined vehicle sort of is becoming more prominent as of late, right? So there's still a fairly recent trending kind of thing, and it's only going to gain traction. How can they get a handle on all of this is what your question was, I think. And I think, okay, so there is definitely some learning that's going to happen, that is happening, by the way, at the OEMs and the suppliers or the ecosystem partners. Let me correct myself. And there is a lot of culture change that needs to happen as well, because we in the industry, we are used to thinking about things in sort of more concrete ways and physical ways. We tend not to think as much about abstract items like customer experience, right? Or even software, which is, to some people, it's a bit of an abstract thing because you can't physically handle software, right? So there's a culture change that needs to occur. And I think no one company is going to be able to probably do it all on its own. I think the big sort of takeaway here is that there's going to need to be partnerships and collaboration between the OEMs and all the other players. So every entity in the ecosystem, depending on their role and the use case, there's going to need to be collaboration, because as we know, historically, the industry has not been the most collaborative, okay? OEMs tend to do their things and tell suppliers what to do, and that's about it, right? But now that is changing, and you touched on this, the bargaining power of suppliers is increasing too, and so on and so forth, because there's been consolidation. But the dynamics are changing, and I think collaboration is the key to addressing the situation that I think you mentioned, Maite. If I were to sum it up, I would say collaboration and bringing those different skill sets to bear as a combined approach to solving any given problem.
A couple of other points and other aspects of this is, how do the lines of businesses or stakeholders get access to that data? So there comes the speed of data accessibility. There comes the rules and governance around that data. And so there is a need for data strategy, a very thought out, well-formed data strategy. And often in our conversations with our customers, we end up with having a much deeper conversations around how do we structure this infrastructure for it? What type of governance needs to be in place? How do we make it a self-service portal in a way where the stakeholders can access the data when they want it and how they want to do it? And then we have to have all the protections around that with regards to the security of the APIs, security of the data, personal information security, and so on. So it becomes a much deeper conversation on how this data flows throughout the ecosystem. And so the data strategy piece also becomes very, very important as part of this equation.
Yeah, and part of that, Mahendra, that's right on, the data strategy piece of it. And I think a big part of that, too, is the ownership rights to the data, right? That's a constant struggle in the industry. And that will evolve. As the roles become blurred and as the roles change and as the use cases evolve and change, I think the data ownership rights issues they will also evolve.
I do have a follow-up question in that, and this is actually coming from the Q&A. I must say the audience is really lively and engaging here, and it's a question that really fits well in what you all just said. Especially, Mahendra, you're talking about the security, right? So what type of security needs to be in place to protect the data, also to protect the vehicle, but the data from the ecosystem as well?
Yeah, so there are a lot of thinking happening in the industry around these topics. We have had regulations, GDPR, which of course talked about the personal information. There's also WP29 regulations that have come about that talk about the overall security landscape that goes from the edge all the way to the cloud and to the stakeholders. And so there is a much more comprehensive activity and actions going on this so that we can provide that security layer. Additionally, there is also thinking on how do we secure the AI aspect that's in the vehicle, so the security of AI. So this topic continues to evolve as we go. So it's a much more of a continuum from the vehicle all the way to the cloud side of things. And of course, security is a job number one at AWS for providing that security of the cloud of our infrastructure. But it is also, as we call it, a shared responsibility model where we provide the security of the entire cloud infrastructure, and then the OEMs and the consumers provide security for their own applications, but we provide mechanisms to enable that. Additionally, there is a large amount of ecosystem around this topic. They work very closely with us because the cyber security vector keeps changing, the surface area keeps increasing, and now we're thinking of security throughout the life cycle of the vehicle. So we now need to have a very updatable posture. So there are a lot of solutions that are built based on the services that we provide as an infrastructure. But then there's also continuous monitoring. There is something called security observations or operation centers, VSOCs, that OEMs will establish so that they can continue to monitor the security landscape and be able to contain any incidences that could happen as part of that within minutes. And so that's where I think there's an extensive amount of work, body of work that is coming around for providing this sort of cybersecurity cover, especially in the software-defined vehicle domains. Sorry, a lot of it, but trying to condense it in a couple of minutes of answer. I'm sure there will be additional comments from others as well on the panel.
If anything else to add, I have more questions.
I was going to say cybersecurity is so important, right? Because at the end of the day, all of this is about trust, right? And we've seen what's happened with some of the autonomous drive situations where there have been accidents. And, I don't want to mention any specific companies, but it's been in the news lately and we all know what's happening. And the reason the autonomous, by the way, is having some challenges is because of trust, because consumers don't trust the technology yet. So as we go forward with software-defined vehicles, as the complexity increases and the risk profile, the surface area, as you so eloquently put it, Mahendra, increases, I think there's going to have to be greater vigilance. These VSOCs you mentioned and things things that you guys have put in place, and in addition to the app level security, because without trust, you can't have a good user experience, right? And so it's hard to overstate how important that is to make sure that whatever we do, it's absolutely as secure as it can possibly be.
Thank you for that. And I think one question I have on top of what you mentioned about security is we do have some upcoming regulation of cybersecurity. I think you both touched on this. And just for our audience, could we explore what would be the impact of WP29 and ISO 21434 for OEMs? It seems that OEMs will have to have this complete idea of the software that is running in the cars, and also there's some liability in terms of software that runs in the car as well, regardless of who owns the IP. So could you elaborate a bit more on that?
I can make a couple of comments. So specific to R155, there are two aspects to this. One is the cybersecurity management system itself, and that goes into the org structure, the processes, the governance aspects of how that software is managed, how that software is delivered, how it is deployed, and such. And then there is also the software update management system, and it goes to the test reports, the threat modeling, mitigation, ensuring cybersecurity throughout the life cycle of the vehicle. So there are various aspects of that regulation that comes into play. And as part of this, of course, since the software sourcing will come from also multiple players, the OEMs have a larger role to play. Of course, they have to keep the inventory of the software, if you would, or what we can call it as a software bill of materials that is delivered on every vehicle. And it could be different from a vehicle to vehicle because, some may choose an update, may not choose an update. There might be variants of the vehicle out there. And so this becomes an solution that they have to develop and maintain to be compliant with these regulations. And on the collaboration side of things, then of course, the development, starting from development itself, cybersecurity is not an afterthought. It has to be built as the part of the software. So there's a lot of collaboration between the players that are going to contribute to the software that's going to be on the vehicle. But then ongoing basis, they have to stay tuned with regards to what is the vector or what's the security surface that is vulnerable and so on. And so there is a much more collaborative approach now between all the software components that come out, or the players that are contributing to this software on the vehicle. So it changes how the organization looks at cybersecurity, how it interacts with the supplier systems and supplier community, and how it delivers. So there's quite a bit of impact in that sense from these regulations.
Yeah, and Mahendra, to your point, to that, to just add on to that too, it's going to put a greater onus for vehicle validation of that software base. It's going to change. It's going to impact the vehicle validation process because the OEM now has a liability and a really a very strong interest in making sure that that software works as as advertised, so to speak, and that everything works as designed. And then also from a supplier's perspective, they're probably going to have to reveal their IP to the OEM, right? Because the OEM says, hey, I need to see your source code because I need to test everything because I'm ultimately on the hook for it. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic as well, right? So, I mean, again, it goes back to that trust and collaboration piece of it, that some of those barriers are going to have to come down because at the end of the day, everyone's in this together.
I think a follow-up question we do have in the Q&A, but I'm going to jump through it because it really has everything to do with what we're discussing. And someone is asking, okay, with so many new people in the supply chain, who owns the problem? So we are discussing here with the cybersecurity laws, the OEM will be the ultimate liable for the software, but we do need to have collaboration between the partners to make sure that everything is working well. Is that correct? Sorry, Peter, I think you are on mute.
I missed the last part of what you said. I was on mute. Sorry, what did you say? The last
part?
Sure.
So who owns the problem here now that we have so many players in the supply chain? I think from the cybersecurity legislation, we can say that the OEM will be the ultimate player that will be liable for if we have any problem in terms of the software running in the car. Is that correct?
That's what I think the regulations are requiring.
It's about liability, right? I mean,
yeah.
Who has the liability is one who's going to profit from it, and that's going to be the OEMs.
And the UNECE 155 and 156 place the responsibility squarely on the OEM.
It also is a issue of delivering that user experience. So if I get logged out of my car, if that's not the best experience, if I'm using a digital key, for example, right? So the key here is how do we validate also the software that we're going to deliver, and there needs to be collaboration in that space as well. So, cloud native development mechanisms that we have been talking to the customers, there've been a lot of talk about virtual engineering workbenches and, collaborating in the software space ahead of this problem. So it's not just about liability, it's also about software quality, it's also about the user experience and the collaboration needs that stem from that. And so I think we should look at it from a bigger perspective, not then narrowly just about liability. It's also about, what is the consumer experience that we really want, because at the end of the day, we want our customers to be happy, be brand loyal at the end of the day. And that will all come back to what is the quality of experience we are delivering.
It all comes back to experience.
The customer experience, indeed. And well, as I said, the audience is very lively, so I'm going to skip to the Q&A questions if that's okay, so we continue this really exciting dialogue. There is one question that we have here that it's quite specific. So the question is from Rudy Sultana. Do you feel having a precise, so 3 centimeters, GPS in every car will improve the data quality that you collect for making better future products?
I'll make a quick comment maybe. The precise GPS needs come from the self-driving aspect of the vehicle operations. And in the self-driving mode, you really want to be aware of where the vehicle is in the lane at any given point in time. And so you need a precise map and you need a precise GPS to locate. So it's a simultaneous localization and mapping quality that goes towards self-driving. And so that precise GPS needs comes there. Whether it improves the data quality, of course, you are always trying to find the metrics of how the vehicle performance is in any given scenario. And so, so if that data is available, of course, you will be able to access that and improve on the performance of those algorithms and features. But it doesn't go back to the point that you want to collect data all the time. So you want to collect data as and when it is needed. So intelligent data logging comes into play and so on. There are the other aspects. But the precise GPS, I hope I answered that question as to where it is required and how it impacts the vehicle operation. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Mahendra. There is another question that we have is, do you believe that SDVs will standardize hardware on the vehicle?
Will standard? Oh, yeah. So I'll just share what I think about that. So I think there will be I don't know if it'll be standardized exactly the same hardware, but there will be some agreements on standards that each of the ecosystem partners will have to follow. So I think there will be room for individualization and, uniqueness, I think, I would imagine, because there are a lot of the brand identity is going to be tied to some of that. But I think there will have to be some standards that everyone follows to deliver the software and the capabilities. So it's not standardization, but standards, if you will, in a sense, right? So things are done in the same way, that they're compatible. In other words, so that things that need to work together properly, if that makes sense.
I agree with Peter. There is sort of a decoupling of hardware and software. It's not a monolith anymore. You want to be able to make the software and hardware portable in that sense. And so there are standardization efforts in that regards. SOFI is one of those standards, standard bodies that we are actively working with to create this sort of an abstraction between hardware and software so that we can continue to update the software. And these are the standards that industry is, these are the types of standards, I should say, that industry is looking at so that we can standardize in that sense.
Next question now is, what are your thoughts on in-cabin transactions in EVs, whether paying for charging or paying for things like food or the driver pickups along the way, meaning paying for things through the vehicle interface as opposed to paying through, let's say, the smartphones?
So the question is, what are our thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I will believe, so bringing to the context of the discussion, do you think this microtransactions in the vehicle, does that affect a data collection and how OEMs, assess the data? Is it an additional source of data?
I would say yes. Yes, it is, because it's all about how the customer is using the vehicle, which then allows the OEM and the parties in that transaction to analyze that data and then deliver improved services. So just like when we watch something on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, it knows what we watch and it makes recommendations, right? So it's exactly the same kind of concept as the system learns. So yeah, I think that's going to be that is part of something that would be of interest. It is of interest now, to the involved parties, to the OEMs, in this case. That's at least what I think about it. So if others may have a view. Hopefully that answered the question.
Well,
Does it answer the question?
Isn't Peter, we were looking at $9 trillion of projected monetization around this streaming services, infotainment, edutainment, right?
That's it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, that's where we're going, right? It's going to look like your TV at home, and you're going to have all these Apple TV. You're going to have Netflix, as you mentioned. It's going to be constantly changing, and there's a huge market there, and the upside is enormous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an estimate I think came from an Accenture study or something that was from by 2040, about $9 trillion of software-defined vehicle services, and that includes ecosystem services, mobility services, in vehicle, outside the vehicle, basically the whole ecosystem. Yes. So I think to add to that question and to what Ken said, really, we have to think of the vehicle as a part of our life, not as integrated into our lifestyle. So whether we're ordering that food in our living room and then the app that we order it from knows and can make recommendations because we like this kind of pizza or that kind of whatever food, it's really not that much different, if at all, when you're ordering it from the vehicle, because ultimately, if you just stitch it all together, it's all the experience of how we live our lives, right? And the vehicle is part of that. And so all of that really ties into that end-to-end digital experience and making that as seamless and as possible.
Thank you so much for that. I think the next question is quite interesting. Someone is saying that today, truck OEMs, so commercial vehicle OEMs, they are more advanced in handling information than OEMs focusing consumer vehicles. So I believe that this person is probably referring to fleet management capabilities, for example, as it says that they are more capable of knowing when the vehicle is about to have a fault, for example. So the question is, when do you expect OEMs focused in consumer vehicles to achieve this level?
Well,
I think there is a varying degree of maturity across the industry, and so it is very hard to pick one segment over other or one OEM versus others, because there's a varying level of innovation, varying level of maturity across the board, and that continues to evolve. And people are making rapid progress in these areas. It's a very transformative change, as we saw. It's a challenging as well, and in terms of one segment versus others, they face different levels of operational design domains. And so advances can happen for those operational design domains at a different pace. And so you might sense them for a certain amount of time, but I think the transformation is wide across the board. And so everybody is in this phase, and they might have a varying level of maturity. So it depends on where you sit and what you observe. But I think there is different levels that I would say are available across the board.
Yeah, and also, go ahead. Sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Oh, so the other thing too, and Mahendra, to add on to what you also said, is that like you said, Maite, I think a lot of that relates to fleet management, and that's kind of in the question. But when you're managing a fleet, you don't, you have the right to collect data, geo fencing data, and route data, and all that. OEMs cannot collect that from individuals, because then you get into privacy situations, right? So the OEM has no right to know my route and where I went and how I got there or whatever. So there's going to be always some difference there. It's not going to be exactly the same, at least not until unless somebody changes the law and says we have no right to our own privacy anymore, which may happen. But at this point, there's a difference in the kinds of use cases for commercial versus individual, and specifically around data privacy.
Yeah, and as you look at commercial vehicles, right? I mean, the traditional commercial vehicle, if it's not a fleet, these are being designed to be built, right? I mean, truck drivers have their seats that they like, they have the wire harnessing connections that they want. So they've been doing that a little bit longer, right? Having that personalized vehicle, but we're seeing that more and more in the true automotive. But I think they're going to catch up. It's a different industry, and there's been different requirements over the years. And once again, in the commercial vehicle area, it's very personalized, right? I mean, away from the fleet, we're personalizing those vehicles for someone who's going to a lot of times live in it, right? They got the cab in the back, they got all that. So more technology, it's almost like a mini home, right? And that's the reason I think they're a little ahead in that area.
Yeah. Actually, one of our biggest customers is a company that makes the largest tow truck manufacturer in the world. And every vehicle is custom designed, every single one, because each customer has different requirements. Yes.
And it makes it really hard when you're the suppliers of those commercial vehicles, with a lot of experience, in that commercial vehicle frame, there's different challenges than a repetitive automotive standard car.
In general, the truck business is much more complex, even just your medium duty trucks and all that, because of the different chassis lengths and cab configurations. And there are many, many millions more option combinations than even a regular passenger vehicle.
Exactly. I mean, the wire harness from one commercial vehicle probably is not the same to the next. It's mostly on the personalized ones.
Thank you for that. And I completely agree with these different interesting segments. You also have, the business models in commercial vehicles are a bit different as well. I want to thank Infor for making today's event possible, and also PCG and AWS for joining us.